and then turning it from there would be the start position. So let's see if that works. We'll put our foot on the brake. For 2 years I've messed with that. Come on. Well, I've kept it off camera for 2 years, but I have been having this problem intermittently with the Polaris Ranger for 2 years now. And it's actually gotten worse and worse and worse. Usually, you know, after 10 tries or so, I could get this thing started. And I checked a number of things. For a while, I thought it was the starter, and I would be able to jiggle this thing back and forth in gear, move the starter a little bit, and I thought that's what was making it start. Turns out that was not the case. This is my Polaris Ranger 500 EFI. This is the crew cab version 2010 model. And I've owned this for a number of years. I made a couple videos about it in the past. It has been a great machine to haul firewood and travel through the woods. Couple issues with it, but overall a pretty good, reliable machine. But like I said, the last 2 years I've been having this issue where it won't start. It clicks. So if you're having a problem like this with your Polaris Ranger or other side-by-side or even four-wheeler, this video might help you out. So the motor and battery on our Polaris Ranger actually sit back here under the rear seat. So there's the 500cc engine. Here's the battery and the starter solenoid. When this issue started happening, I thought maybe starter solenoid, maybe battery. So this battery is definitely not brand new, but I would put it on the charger and it would tell me it was fully charged, and I'd leave it on the trickle charger overnight and thought maybe that would help. It never did. Then I thought, well, it's got to be the starter solenoid. It's making that clicking noise, but it won't turn over. The solenoid's got to be bad. So I bought another solenoid. And before I removed this one, I actually tested the new one, and guess what? That didn't solve my problem either. So like I said, for about 2 years, this problem has been getting worse and worse. And that led me to think maybe it's the brake sensor, because you have to have the brake pedal pressed in order for this to start. To open the hood on this Polaris Ranger, 2 rubber straps, one on each side, and you just kind of lift in the middle, and the whole hood tips forward until it rests on the front bumper. Not much under the hood here, but I was trying to find where the sensor is that says when the Polaris Ranger's in gear, which is this selector right here, which moves this rod. And then also, when you have the brake pedal pressed, when you press the brake pedal, it moves this into the brake cylinder. And I'm guessing that this is the sensor that tells you when the brake's pressed or not. And that's probably the safety that tells the Polaris Ranger that you have your foot on the brake pedal before you start the engine. So I am definitely not a multimeter expert, but I tried to use a multimeter to determine, was the sensor telling the engine that my foot was on the brake pedal, and it seemed like it was, because even when the power's off, if you press the brake pedal, the brake lights come on. And then I started to notice when I would turn the key to the light position, I would hear that click, but the lights would not be on. And I learned that if I would turn this key tumbler a little bit too far, you can see there the lights came on. But I am not in the indent on the tumbler in the position where the lights are supposed to come on. And that's what gave me my idea that maybe I should be looking at the ignition switch. So I ordered one and tested it yesterday. So this is not the Polaris OEM switch, but I found this one on Amazon and decided before I spend a lot of money on the Polaris one, I could at least try this and see if it fixed the problem. When my testing yesterday, you know, typically I was at about, I don't know, 1 time out of 50 that the key was working right to start the engine on the Polaris Ranger. When I put this in, it was 1 time out of 1, 2 times out of 2, 3 times out of 3. So I'm fairly confident that the ignition switch was the issue all along. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to remove the old ignition switch, put the new switch in. I think it's going to take less than 3 minutes. So a 3-minute project could have saved me aggravation over the last 2 years. If I take the key out, you can see there is a plastic nut that will spin and allow this entire ignition switch to come out of its position. Now you might have to use a wrench for this. Mine seemed to be just finger tight. As you can see, it's loosening up here. And to test this like I did, before I even took all this out, I just disconnected the wire from the back, connected the new ignition switch to the wire to test if that was the issue before I went through the problem of removing the old one. So there's the part we just unscrewed. Next, there's a little push pin here, and that's going to allow this wire to come off of this ignition switch. So we're going to push this with a small screwdriver. So right here, we're just going to push down on this tab with the screwdriver, and then you can see how the old ignition came right out of there. Here's my new ignition. Came with its own keys because it will be keyed differently than the original. Again, these are not OEM parts, but I'll put the Amazon link down below to this part that I bought and the OEM part. So if you want to buy the real deal, you can do that. If you want to buy this one, which seems to work for me, you can do that. We're going to put this inside here, right in the same spot as the old one. There is a small, like a key here that lets this line up in a certain position through the plastic. Now I like to use a little bit of dielectric grease in these type of connections whenever I'm installing a new part. So I'm just going to put a little dab right across there. And then I'm going to push this right into that connector, which I could have done actually before I put the ignition switch in, but this way worked just as good. In case you were curious, here's the new switch on the left and the old switch on the right. You can see they are keyed differently, so the old switch would not work in the new tumbler or the new ignition switch. So let's try our new switch here, see if we have better success than the old one. Now here's one problem, and probably because this is aftermarket and not OEM, but you know that little keyway that I had to line up, well now my key isn't lining up with the indicator. So it should be about like this in the off position, like this when the lights are on, like that when the lights are off, running, and like this when it's started. But you can see now, it looks like I'm already in the running position, even though I'm not. First click should be the lights. And that worked perfectly. Lights on, lights off. Next click would be the run position. And then turning it from there would be the start position. So let's see if that works. We'll put our foot on the brake. For 2 years, I've messed with that. So what wasn't it? Well, it wasn't the battery. It wasn't the starter solenoid right here. It wasn't the starter. All that time, it was the ignition switch. All right, so let's test it and make sure. So it will bother me that the key doesn't line up with the indicator, but I'm gonna have to live with that. 1 click is the lights, works perfectly. 2 clicks is run. There you go, super easy. Less than 5-minute project, could have saved me 2 years of headaches, shaking this thing around, tapping the starter, testing the solenoid. Now those were probably all possible issues that would have caused the same symptom, but now we know, super easy to switch out that ignition switch. 464.1 hours, 2,196 miles. So there you go, easy ignition replacement in a Polaris Ranger. Again, this is a 2010 500i, but I imagine some older, some newer, very similar situation, very similar process to replacing that ignition switch. If you found this video informative and entertaining, please give us a big thumbs up. Leave those comments down below if the switch is what you would have tested first before messing around with the starter and the starter solenoid and even the battery. I would not have gone to the switch first, but next time I certainly would. And it was nice to be able to buy the switch and test it without actually removing the existing switch, because that told me that was most likely the issue. I wish I would have done it 2 years ago. Thanks for watching. Hopefully we'll see you again the next time.